Welcome to our fourth program in Spotlight Psalms. Today we pick up one of the most famous of all the Psalms. Indeed, we could argue one of the most famous pieces of world literature. We look at the 23rd Psalm. Now, hopefully in your life group, your grace group, maybe in your private devotions or your Sunday school class, you've already read this before turning on the video. And indeed, I haven't read the entire Psalms previously, but I'm going to read the 23rd Psalm. Why? Just because it's so awesome, and it is a joy to have the opportunity simply to say these words, and it won't hurt you any to hear them one more time. The 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare before me a table in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The 23rd Psalm is just awesome, isn't it? Well, in my many years of being a pastor, I have done many funerals. And I can tell you that probably I could count on the fingers of both my hands the number of times that the 23rd Psalm has not been included. It's a staple at funerals and memorial services. Why? Because it brings such comfort and such assurance to us in times of trouble and times of loss. But there's a little bit of danger that goes along with this. It can become a little too easy to associate the 23rd Psalm with just funerals, just deaths, just those times of intense and deep loss, and not to think about the 23rd Psalm as a psalm for everyday living. I might liken this to another piece of scripture, 1 Corinthians 13. Almost every Christian wedding that you go to, you will hear the words of 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous, it does not seek its own end, so that we start to think of 1 Corinthians 13 as that wedding chapter. Well, sometimes we can start to think of the 23rd Psalm as that funeral psalm. But God intends the 23rd Psalm for everyday life. Just think about the final verse of the 23rd Psalm. It says, surely and goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. That is everyday living, all the days of my life. And then concludes with, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's evermore. So it's for every day, and it's for evermore. Now, a quick word about the structure of the 23rd Psalm. It has 6 short verses. But I think we can divide it into 3 parts. Part 1, in verse 1, is the introduction. Verses 2 through 5 make 3 points, and then verse 6 gives us the conclusion. It's like a 5-paragraph mini essay. Way back years ago, I taught middle school at Anderson Middle School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, to 8th graders. Nobody had ever asked them to even try to write an essay before. And I introduced the concept of a 5-paragraph essay. You begin with an introduction. In the first paragraph, you give 3 supporting paragraphs, and you conclude in your 5th and final paragraph. Well, this is a mini essay. Verse 1, introduction, verses 2 through 5, 3 supporting points. Verse 6 is the conclusion. So well done, David, with your mini essay in the 23rd Psalm. We're going to walk through these 3 parts in order, of course. So, verse 1, the introduction, kind of gives the sum of the psalm in short. The Lord is my shepherd. Now, of course, this image of a shepherd would have been very common for people in David's age. We know David himself had been a shepherd as a young lad, and once he had grown up and been anointed and become the king, he no longer was shepherding sheep. No, now he is shepherding people. He is shepherding God's people, the nation of Israel. And there are 2 points that come out of this first verse that are significant for us with regard to shepherds. They follow one after the other. What's the first point? The first point is that the shepherd is in control of the sheep. The sheep are not in control of the shepherd. It's a good situation where the shepherd has command over and authority over the sheep of his fold. But if the sheep ever get the upper hand and the shepherd's chasing them down the lane or the aisle or pathway, then we are in a sorry state of affairs, to be sure. But no, the acknowledgement here by David is, the Lord is my shepherd. I'm not trying to be the shepherd. I'm not trying to be the one in control. I acknowledge from the beginning, like any good shepherd, that the shepherd must lead and guide the sheep. It cannot be the other way around. And I think this is a good starting point for us with the 23rd Psalm. We have to make that same decision. Who's the shepherd and who are the sheep? Have we acknowledged God to be indeed our shepherd? Have we said to Jesus, you are my good shepherd, and I am the sheep, and I am not going to try to make it work the other way around? It's a simple point, but I think it's harder to live than it is to state, because many Christians, even Christians who are zealous for their faith, unwittingly fall into wanting the Lord to be their guide, yes, or to be their comfort. They want the Lord to give them wise counsel. They would like the Lord to provide for their needs. They want Jesus to be their friend. We even see sometimes kind of a little silliness of saying, the Lord is my co-pilot. But all of these things are to say that these things are good things and things that God does provide for us, but they fall short of determining who is in control. You can have a counselor, and the counselor's not in control. You can have someone provide for your needs, and that person is not the one who is in charge. You can have a friend, and yet not have that friend be the one who makes the final decisions and calls, and so on and so forth. And we can fall into this trap as Christians to say, I want the Lord to be all those other things, but I haven't really settled the score on who's the shepherd and who is the sheep. And that is essential. Why? Because of the second part of verse 1, I shall not want. What we need to see, it's only as we have settled the question of who is the shepherd, who's in control, who's in charge, that the second part follows in suit and with truth. When the Lord is our shepherd, controlling, directing, and guiding, and calling the shots, then I shall not want. In linguistics, this is called a conditional sentence. There's a protasis, the Lord is my shepherd, and an apodosis, I shall not want. If the Lord is my shepherd, contingency, then I shall not want. So that first part of who's in charge is vitally important. All right, having settled who is in charge, let's move to the body of our mini essay in 6 verses. What are the 3 supporting points for this first opening verse? We find them in verses 2 through 5. The first one is found in verses 2 and 3. It says that the Lord provides. When he is the shepherd, he provides so that I shall not want. First of all, he provides for our daily needs, the things that we need. Paul writes in Philippians 4:19, and my God shall meet all of your needs according to his glorious riches, when he is the shepherd and we are the sheep. We see this illustrated, of course, through the image of the sheep. The shepherd, what does he do? He provides the green pastures in which we may lie down in comfort and peace. He is the one who provides the still waters. And a little note on that, still waters are necessary because sheep will not drink out of running water. They will dehydrate and die if you place them in front of running water. They need still water, and the Lord knows our needs that deeply, and he can provide for our physical needs, our bodily needs, our need for shelter and clothing, those basics of life. But then this first part of this first point moves to another thing. It says that God provides for our spiritual needs. You restore my soul. Not only does the Lord care about and provide for us physically, he provides for our hearts and our souls. He restores our souls when we submit and follow him as our good shepherd. And then a third point of his provision is that he leads and guides us in life. You lead me in the paths of righteousness for your name's sake. It's simply a way of saying that we need guidance, we need direction. A shepherd is the one who will guide his sheep in the right paths, the safe paths, the true paths. We can depend upon the Lord to guide us in the days of our lives if we will submit to him in his right paths. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, so famous, so well known to many of us. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lead not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will do what? He will direct your paths. He will lead you in the paths of righteousness. So the first supporting paragraph there is that he provides for us. The second supporting paragraph tells us that he will indeed provide for us, but most particularly through the dark and difficult passages of our lives. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, the start of that little segment says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The valley of the shadow of death is a little bit ambiguous. It certainly says, even though I walk through the dark shadow, the dark valley, the dark place in my life, whether or not it necessarily applies to death and death only is debated by scholars. Many scholars thinking that it includes death, but is not limited to death. So let's broaden this one out just a little bit and see that it applies to the times where we walk through the dark valley. Not necessarily death, but you have dark valley times in your life. The image being used here is one in which we think of a shepherd leading the sheep through a very narrow chasm with walls almost in on top of the sheep and the shepherd. And just a little slice of daylight, perhaps for an hour or so when the sun is straight overhead, piercing down to the base of the canyon. It has many twists and turns, and there may be fear among the sheep as to what's around the next corner. It's almost as though you certainly can't go back, but you could be afraid of what might be up ahead. And it is the shepherd who leads the sheep through this narrow valley in a dark place. And what David, of course, is saying is the Lord, as our shepherd, is the one who will guide us when we walk through those valleys in our lives. There are some of us listening now who are in that dark valley. You feel hemmed in to the right and to the left. You want to go back, but you know that going back is not the way to live. And you're afraid or unsure what's around the next corner. Have you ever been in that place in your life? That's what David's talking about. And yet David then extends it to the valley, which is the shadow of death. For many people, that is the most narrow of valleys. It's no turning back. You have to go forward. Life does not afford you the opportunity to continue, and you're unsure and uncertain in your soul about going through that last part of the dark valley. Let me simply say that this experience varies for Christians. There are some Christians for whom dying, we're not afraid of death, we go to be with the Lord, but the dying part can be pretty tough for some people and fearful to some people. I think of John Bunyan with his classic, The Pilgrim's Progress at the end. Christian's friend goes across the river to the celestial city and almost walks as though the water is very, very shallow and has no problem. But Christian wades in and the river is deep and he's losing his footing and he feels he's going to be swiped away down with the current and drowned underneath until he emerges out in heaven at that celestial city. It's going to be different for different Christians as to what we experience. For some it will be a dark valley, a valley of the shadow. And the point here, of course, here is the Lord is with us, however that goes. He will not leave us. He will not forsake us. He will walk with us. And his rod, it comforts us because that's how he fends off our greatest enemies, including death itself. His staff comforts us because that staff was used by the shepherd to guide the sheep so that they got to their destination. And he will guide you through to your destination as you continue to know that he is the shepherd and you are the sheep. Well, we finally come to now the third point of this little mini essay, and that has to do, the Lord is my shepherd, shall not want. And we've seen 2 points here. We don't want, because he provides, we don't want through the dark times. But now I've got to make a transition because David uses a new image and metaphor. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. The Lord is the one who will provide even in the face of our enemies. You see, the image here isn't about sheep, it's about someone coming to a feast table. And the Lord is the one who's the master of ceremonies and the host of the table, and we are his guests. But most interestingly, it says, God, you provide that for me in the presence of my enemies. And in ancient times, when a victory had occurred against an enemy, you would have the victors celebrating at a feastal table, and the enemies would have to stand around the circle in chains and watch on as part of the evidence of their thorough defeat. That's the image that's going on here. What I want you to notice is that David doesn't stop to say, will there be enemies as we make our way through life? He assumes that enemies will be present. We're all going to have enemies. We're going to have them in our presence. Just count on it. David had an enemy. His name was Goliath when he was a boy. David had enemies as a young man, Saul trying to kill him. David had enemies like his own son Absalom when he was an older man. And you will have enemies too. There will be people who don't like who you are or what you are. There'll be people who are just mean for the sake of being mean and making life tough on you. Anticipate that there will be enemies. But in the midst of that, what David says is, we can trust in the Lord to provide a table for us. He will ultimately conquer all of those enemies, and we can trust in him because he is generous and he is kind and gracious to us, that he will indeed anoint our heads with oil. He will refresh us with the oil of anointing. Our cups will overflow on that great and glorious day when we feast with him in the kingdom of heaven, the feast of forever. That will be the day of the overflowing cup, to be sure. So, says David, in his third supporting paragraph, we can trust the Lord that he will provide for us, even in the midst of our enemies, so that we shall not want. Isn't this a great little psalm if you look at it that way? The conclusion comes in verse 6. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. We've seen that goodness and mercy, the Lord who provides for us, the Lord who will guide us through the dark valleys, the Lord who will be with us to give victory against our enemies. All of that we shall not want. But let us remember, this is only true, only true for us when we remember that the Lord is our shepherd and we constantly yield to him the leadership, the control, and the guidance of our lives. That's the 23rd Psalm for today. I'm Tim Janisewski, and we'll talk to you next time.